Paul Allen, now joined by Wobby from Vikings.com and Courtney Cronin from ESPN and ESPN.com, where we are thinking just like you. What position do the Vikings significantly consider early in the draft?
Well, what's their biggest need? Offensive line. And I know that I should go and try to appease this fan base by picking for them at 18 and thinking that they're going to go rounds 1, 2, and 3 O-line. But when you take a look at where they're picking, that's a spot where I'm not necessarily sure what they have on their board would match drafting right there at 18, unless you can get Jonah Williams to fall out of the top 15 and maybe to 18, because he seems like the most versatile lineman that would possibly be available for them. I think that you might need to take a look at this defensive line class. It's loaded, not just at the top, but quite a bit throughout. And I don't think when you look at the top 10, that Quinnen Williams, Jeffrey Simmons, Christian Wilkins, Rashawn Gary, Ed Oliver, they're not all going in the top 10. If you can get one of those guys to fall at 18, I think you have to go defensive line, especially since you might not be able to keep Sheldon Richardson. Obviously, we don't know how free agency is going to play out. But if you can get his day one replacement at 18, you've got to do it.
What do you think, buddy?
Yeah, I think we spend so much time talking about the first round pick. That's all we talk about leading up to the draft. I think it's the easiest pick for teams, because they just say, okay, well, who's the highest guy left on our board when we're on the clock? We're not taking the 24th best player.
It's so easy,
at
Bobby.
18. We're taking the best player on the board at 18, and it really doesn't matter what position he takes, what position he plays. Plus, if Courtney, if you're right and the team is saying offensive line is our biggest need, they're going to predetermine their action in free agency and address the offensive line there. They're not going to predetermine what position they take at 18. They're going to take the highest rated player. That's why Spielman sends his scouts out all year round to grade these players, to put grades on them, and you take the best one when you're on the clock.
What do you think, Ben?
I don't think you overthink it. I think you have to go offensive line. It's a deep offensive line class, but I don't know if it's deep enough to go all the way down the second round to the 50th pick where the Vikings have their second pick. Do you find a high-quality starter at number 50? I don't know if you can. Obviously, you got to see how everything plays out. And Courtney, I agree with you. I'm a defensive guy. I think that you still have to build through your defensive line. And, you know, Linval did not have a great year. Sheldon may or may not be on the team. So you could find a 3-technique replacement, and it could be a high-level replacement there at 18. But I think this is one of those drafts, you don't overthink it. If you can find a Cody Ford that can really reestablish the mentality of the offense, be that guy that can run downhill and hit you in the mouth, and be a pass protector, or an Andre Dillard, one of those guys. Jawan Taylor's a fantastic player too. So if he falls there, it's going to be hard to pass up those guys and go with defense or somebody else.
And I think at 50, you might be able to get someone like an Andre, not maybe Andre Dillard. I think he's probably a little bit higher. Greg Little. I think that would be a perfect pick for them at 50, where you could get somebody who might not be able to play right now, or at least early on, maybe take that same Brian O'Neill route, but somebody that you could potentially get in there. They need pass protectors. They need guys who are nasty enough to be able to battle linebackers at the second level. They need that type of athleticism, and I think there is quite a bit of it in this draft class, and that you could get good value at 50 with the offensive.
What about at 30? Can't you call some teams and see if anyone wants to get out at the end of the first round?
Right.
I mean, Rick's done that in the past.
Yeah, I mean,
you could certainly trade back.
If you trade back, I mean, now everything.
No, I'm saying you get 2 in the first round.
You
come
say
back in from the second
back
round.
in.
You know, if you think your need is that big along the offensive line, and you've taken a defensive player at 18, there's nothing that stops you from getting back in the first round.
And what makes this entire process interesting is free agency takes place before the draft. So whether it's a bargain, whether it's a splash, whatever happens in free agency could dictate even the way the early stages of the draft go. Now, with the Vikings in free agency, the franchise tag deadline has come and gone. And the Vikings did not franchise Anthony Barr or Sheldon Richardson. Courtney, how do you read into that?
Well, it's expensive to do it to begin with, and we know that this team is strapped for cash right now. I mean, in order to create salary cap space, you have to make some really tough decisions that are probably going on upstairs in the front office as we speak, trying to restructure guys, maybe trying to move on from certain players. But in order to create space, you have to cut down. And I think that with a guy like Anthony Barr, it's going to be very tough to just find his automatic replacement. I mean, it's a guy who, size alone, looks like a defensive end, has played in this system since Mike Zimmer got here, is a staple of this defense, is kind of the captain there in the middle of the field, calling out plays, calling checks. It's not necessarily say, go find Anthony Barr's replacement in this draft. But what I think you could do, given the value of 4-3 outside linebackers in Mike Zimmer's defense, you might be able to go a little bit more of that rotational role. Use a guy like Eric Wilson, draft Barr's replacement maybe somewhere in the 2nd to 4th round, get good value for that pick, because let's face it, they're in their nickel a lot of times. You need guys who can not just cover the back end, but be really good in, against the pass too.
Yeah, I think free agency, you always have to be very careful. There can be some fool's gold in free agency, and then there can be guys in the 2nd and 3rd wave that you really hit on. I mean, did anyone really celebrate Tom Johnson's signing in 2014? Not really, but I think you look back at the last few seasons of Vikings defense, Tom Johnson's been a pretty good player. Here's a name that I don't think is going to get a lot of attention early on. There's a defensive tackle for the Patriots named Malcolm Brown. I don't think a lot of people really know a lot about him. He has 62 starts for the Patriots since he was drafted.
Texas.
He's played in 3 Super Bowls. You can find guys like that in the 2nd and 3rd waves of free agency who can help your team.
And that's where I was going to go too, is because we are so cash strapped with this salary cap that I'm looking at guys that are going to be cheaper options. I like a guy like Christian Covington out of the Texans, a 3 technique who came out of Rice, smaller school, but high motor guy, great fundamentals, a guy that I think Andre Patterson could really turn into a nice player and could be a solid foundational player for this defense. Then you get an injury-prone guy like Tyler Eifert, bottom of your screen there. Yes, he's injury-prone, has familiarity with Mike Zimmer in Cincinnati, could be a guy that is athletic enough to fit into the system as well. And then a linebacker, Jake Ryan out of Green Bay. I really like the fact that he's coming off his ACL, and he's a player that is not Anthony Barr, but I think that is athletic enough and can fill that hole for the time being.
With the defensive line, that 3 technique position is so important to what Mike Zimmer wants to do defensively that when we talk about Sheldon Richardson, whether he'll be in Minnesota or whether he's going to go move on elsewhere, I think that you just have to look at the emphasis they've placed on getting him last year in free agency and what he does for the rest of the defensive line. Like, there's a reason that they want to keep him here so badly, because he makes that entire unit go. He's able to keep the quarterback high in the pocket so the defensive ends can come in and do their jobs. That's not a position that you want to become a revolving door. You mentioned a guy like Tom Johnson, Wobby. I think that the Vikings would definitely be interested in bringing him back in that rotational role, but you still need your day one guy, somebody who's going to be in there in a primary role. And I mean, it's going to be tough to replace Sheldon Richardson if he walks, which is why I think there's going to be concerted effort to keep him here.
Free agents, draft picks, free agents. Let's put a bow on this by asking, with the 2019 Vikings, where do you think the bigger impact will be made? With free agents or with draft picks?
I think it's going to be with draft picks. And again, I'm going off this notion that there's not a lot of money to spend. And if they can free up some cash and some cap space, and they can find a guy that they think they can plug in right now, then yeah, I think the free agent market is going to be important. But I don't think you're going to find a lot of them. You may find one guy out of a couple. I think the draft is where you're going to build this team. And again, this goes back all the way to the end of the season when Mike Zimmer had his postseason press conference. He says, first and foremost, I want attitude on this football team. I need to bring an edge to this football team. I think in the draft, they find guys with personality, they find guys with an edge, and that's going to reestablish the whole culture of this team.
I think you'd be real hard-pressed to make a case for free agency with the way Rick Spielman and this staff like to build a team. I mean, look how, yes, Linval Joseph, great free agent signing. There are examples like that on this team, but this team is where it has been under Mike Zimmer because of how they have drafted, and that's going to be the case this season. I don't know if they'll come back into the first round and have 2 first-round picks. I'm not saying it's going to be that splashy, but I think the Vikings are going to get probably 2 starters, one at 18 and one at 50 in this draft. Yeah.
And you don't count out Rick Spielman in the draft as somebody who's going to probably get you some more draft picks. I mean,
absolutely.
That's his MO in April in those 3 days, and I wouldn't be surprised, like Wobby's saying, if he's able to get more high draft capital. Because if you want to fix this offensive line through free agency, the names are not that great right now. I mean, Matt Paradis, I had a few others here. What am I looking at? Roger Saffold, Mitch Morse. I mean, those guys are, if you're 27 and plus looking up ahead at free agency, I don't know if you want to go overspend on that. Of course, someone's going to pay Roger Saffold a ton of money here in free agency. Is it the smartest option when you can build through the draft and possibly get more draft capital to go get the offensive line where it needs to be and get pass protectors? I'm not so sure.
Here's another aspect of roster building, too, is player development. Yeah. I mean, Holton Hill. probably a guy who's going to have an opportunity to step up and play.
Yeah.
Eric Wilson got that opportunity last year. How about Jalen Holmes, who was a mid-round pick out of Ohio State last year? I mean, you have to develop players. The Vikings have done a good job with that. I think, Ben, you talked about Andre Patterson and the work he's done with some of our defensive linemen. That's another aspect of building a roster that you have to be good at, and that will play a factor this offseason.